So let's move to our next session. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to our physical participants and those that are following us virtually. My name is Masamba Choi. I'm the executive of the United Nations Climate Change Global Innovation Hub, which is organizing this dialogue during COP26. The Innovation Hub is made of two specific things. One is this dialogue that we are organizing at each COP, and these are the first dialogue. And then the second aspect is a digital platform where we are trying to enhance the effectiveness of innovation to support climate action. So what we are trying to promote is really a need-based and solution-oriented approach to climate action. So one of the questions that we are asking is how we could satisfy the core human need, including the nutrition and health, can be satisfied using value chain that are low to zero carbon and also that enhance resilience. So this session, potential for transformative climate action in the nutrition and health value chain, fit completely within that topic. So to moderate this panel, we have Mr. Jim Woodhill, Agri-Food Nexus Consulting, and Honorary Research Associate, Environmental Change Institute, University of Oxford. So, Jim, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everybody, or good afternoon if you're other parts of the world. Very much looking forward to this discussion with a great group of panelists we've got here. I think the whole connection between health, nutrition, food and environment, of course, is highly connected and highly important. I mean, we know how much of food contributes to global greenhouse emissions. It's sort of up there towards the 30% level. We know that broadly across the globe, something in the order of 60% of us aren't actually eating a healthy diet, which has huge implications for public health costs. And I guess one could argue that that also undermines the money that we could potentially spend on climate mitigation and adaptation. We know the huge linkages between land use and environment, and we know the huge linkages between throwing away a third of our food and the cost that that has back on the environment and climate. So really important connections here between health, nutrition, environment and food. And so very much looking forward to our panel this morning, giving us some of their insights into how we can actually make a difference here. And I guess what I'd really like our panelists to focus on a little bit is also, what I might call here, stealing from my partner, the idea of evidence of hope. So what are some of the things we see that are actually giving us hope that we can bring around some of these big transformations that are needed in the connection between food, health, nutrition and climate? What are some of the big transformations we need? And how do we make this happen on sort of more of a systemic way? How do we get the deeper structural changes that are needed in the system to make this happen? And I think we're also going to hear a little bit of what this means around the potential role of technology and digital solutions there. So to make sure we've got enough time for our discussion, I won't give lengthy introductions to each of our panelists, but I'll ask them to briefly introduce themselves as they come to them. What I'm going to ask them to do is to first give us 2 minutes. What do you think are the big issues or challenges here, and what do you see as some of the solutions? Once we've heard from 2 minutes from each of the panelists, we'll then open up to a broader discussion to explore the issues that I've just outlined, given on what we hear from the panelists in their first 2 minutes. And we'd, of course, welcome any questions that can come in from the audience if that's possible. So, Oumar, could I perhaps hand over to you? Business Development Director for Africa Nutrition International. How do you see this situation? What gives you hope? What sort of changes would you like to see happen? Oh, I think you might be on mute, Oumar.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this great panel. So I'm really honored to be here. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, Jim. My take is 3 points to really going through straight to the solution. We know enough about the current situation, how dire it is, and how difficult it could be if we continue doing the business as usual. For me, the solution are on 3 points. The first point is about integration. How can we ensure that health, nutrition are fully integrated into the other programs? So including infrastructure, including any other education, any other sector, this should be fully integrated. So we should work hands on hand to really maximize the impact on those sectors. My second point is about how can we get the food production closer to home? How can we really put most of our way to ensure that we are working toward a food system that is close to the people who are eating, not a food that cross all the world to reach a customer. So you can imagine the carbon prints of those foods. That is really what my second point is. And the third point is about innovation at the base, innovation at the grassroots level. How can we ensure that we take innovation to the community level that is owned by the community, that value the indigenous knowledge that already the community have in the level? How can we value that? How can we build on that knowledge? So these are my 3 points that I will be discussing with you today. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Oumar. A really nice start there. Could you just give us quickly, what's an example or something you've seen happening lately that actually gives you hope that these changes are possible?
That is it really. For instance, I will tell you about our experience with the African Development Bank. So my organization have been working and providing technical support to African Development Bank to ensure that all the investment are nutrition sensitive. So it is a technical assistance that we give to scan all the African Development Bank program to ensure that there are nutrition sensitive, that take into account the nutrition aspect for the integration. Either the program is on health, infrastructure, access to water, sanitation, we ensure that it is integrated to nutrition. And for that, we have been moving from around at the beginning some year ago. The program was like around 2 billion that was sensitive to nutrition. With that technical assistance, we are now moving around $10 billion that are sensitive to nutrition. So I think these are really critical examples.
Great, thanks, Oumar. That's a really nice example to sort of kick us off and showing how important it is to integrate these things back into the financial sector as well. And very good points there about the production base and coming back to the innovation close at home. So really nice way to kick us off. Anitha, can I come to you with sort of roughly the same sort of questions, and if you could briefly introduce yourself. Oh, and I think you're also on mute. I was in a face-to-face meeting the other day where everybody was joking about needing to unmute themselves.
Sorry for that. I'm Anitha. I'm a nutrition scientist from ICRISAT. Okay, so the bigger challenges, what I'm seeing currently as a nutritionist is, the more than 70% of the plate, I mean, even 3 meals that what we are eating is staple. And that is big 3, which is rice, wheat, and maize. So these are the 3 staples eaten in a huge amount, and the rest of the only 20 to 30% of the meal is other food, vegetable and pulses and other food groups. So which is actually a bigger challenge, because these big 3 are actually, it leaves the carbon footprint is high, and also they consume a lot of water, and they are more starchy, and then the other nutrient deficiencies are not tackled. And the growing problem of diabetes, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, anemia is not yet solved. I mean, it's keep growing. So these are all I'm seeing. It is all coming from that major food that we are eating, which has to be diversified basically. Because if we have to achieve in reducing malnutrition, it is important to focus on the bigger portion that we are eating, what we are eating. We have to be very careful on that. And there are plenty of food available. I mean, plants, indigenous plants are available, but unfortunately, we have given focus more on only these big three. So that's the bigger challenge that I'm seeing, and the solution. One of the solutions that I'm working on since 12 years now is millets as an alternate staple. And it actually drought tolerant crop, and it actually reduces the carbon footprint. When you compare with rice and wheat, it actually has less carbon footprint, and water footprint also is very less for millet, and it's more nutritious. So I'm seeing it as one of the good solution for it. Yes.
Great. Thank you very much, Anitha. I'm not sure whether others might have missed it. I actually missed the crop that you were talking about in that last example.
Millets.
Yeah, that's
sorghum. Yeah.
Just to make clear what we're talking. Look, thank you very much. Super interesting there. So you've given us a nice example of millet, but I think also raised this whole question about getting a diversity of diet. And I guess what you're talking about is how do we shift from a more calorie-heavy diet to a more nutritional dense diet, and that's of course a really important thing for us to be speaking about. Lesley, are you with us?
Hi. Is that on? Yep.
So if you could just introduce yourself and give your initial opening points. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. And thank you to the United Nations for hosting this session on food and agriculture, innovation and its relationship to climate, because I think it's an area that's been really understated today and absent from the conversation. I work for Forum for the Future. We are an international sustainability nonprofit that works with businesses and organizations across the world to build out transformational strategies that accelerate their action towards a sustainable future, equip them with futures and systems tools, and build particularly collaborations, which I think is a key point in how we're moving forward towards the climate transformation. I want to raise a point of fear and hope from that fear, and that is that food is responsible for a third of almost of the GHG emissions that we have, the food and agriculture system, and the vast majority of biodiversity loss, and from that, if we don't address food, then and food innovation rapidly, then we are not going to be able to meet the climate challenges. These are fundamentally interconnected. So what gives me hope is the increasing attention to systemic approaches that look across actors across the system towards creating that change. And one particular example of that hope is a project we've been engaging in and creating in the United States called Growing Our Future, which looks at how do you create the acceleration and the transformation towards regenerative agriculture within the value chain, and through a lens of sustainable nutrition. So looking at how do you produce the right kinds of crops regeneratively in ways that will deliver healthy and available and affordable diets for all. And that has brought together over 70 actors across the system, from indigenous farmers organizations, Latino farmers organizations, through to the big multinational food giants and investors. And we have 4 work streams that we can see coming out of that real practical action. So on work streams on finance and shifting the finance system, aligning on policy demands, looking at real practical solutions on the ground, but particularly for this new routes to market. But what we see is it's an absolute transformation of the way value chains work that is going to be required for that. And I hope we get a chance to talk about that further.
Great, thanks Lesley. Just quickly, for those that maybe aren't in the know, when you talk about regenerative agriculture, can you just give us a couple of practical examples that maybe give people more of a visual image of what we mean by that?
Yeah, so this is very much the adoption of practices on the ground that will build back soil health, will sequester carbon, and will provide productivity, but in ways that ensure the resilience and thriving nature of production going forward into the future, but also addresses farming and food from a social dimension, so looks at this from the point of view of sustaining livelihoods, but also making available the right kinds of foods that will enable people to have healthy diets. And the challenge with that, just very briefly, is that we have a food system that is designed for monoculture, is designed for commodities, and is designed for extracting value. So unless we shift the goals and the outcomes of that system to one that provides livelihoods, provides improved soil health, provides carbon sequestration, and makes those changes towards products that deliver healthy diets, we're going to continue to go down a path that will lead to degradation.
Great, thanks very much, Lesley. Great intro. Tom, good to have you with us. What's your view on all of this?
Yes, Jim. I want to thank you and the UN for inviting me for this opportunity to speak. I'm Tom Bruulsema. I'm Chief Scientist with Plant Nutrition Canada, and I also serve as chair for the scientific panel on responsible plant nutrition. This is a panel that is supported by the International Fertilizer Association, and it has 11 scientists. And we got together a little over a year ago and agreed on a definition of responsible plant nutrition: nourishing plants in a sustainable manner, enhancing Earth's capacity to support healthy life. We've defined a new paradigm for plant nutrition. The traditional discipline of plant nutrition as a science focused on improving the growth of plants, improving their resilience to stress, improving the livelihoods improving the income of farmers, improving the through the improvement of yield. But now we're adding on a few new dimensions to be responsible in terms of plant nutrition, adding on dimensions of controlling emissions and looking for respect to the environment where nutrients have negative impacts, and particularly in there associated with the use of nitrogen, the carbon footprint and the emissions of nitrous oxide. Then we also a second additional aim is to improve soil health, including sequestering the carbon in the soil and ensuring that the nutrients are available there for that purpose. A third one is the recycling and idea of circular economy, making more nutrients out of recycled sources rather than mining the resources of the earth that are finite. And finally, and of course the most important today, is what we call nutrition-sensitive agriculture, fertilizing crops in order to improve human health. This was an initiative I was involved with about 10 years ago as well. And in fact, the International Fertilizer Association has a book publication called by that title, Fertilizing Crops for Human Health. And there are so many opportunities by which we can either use fertilizers or select for crop diversification to improve the balance of mineral nutrients, micronutrients, trace elements in the human diet. One example, a recent publication showed that the different levels of nitrogen would influence the levels of zinc in bread wheat. And one of our panel members, Ismail Chakmak, has a research career in that whole area. So I don't know if I've used up my 2 minutes there, Jim, but that's about what I'm going to talk about. I have lots more to say on it yet.
Great, thanks, Tom. Super interesting there, and sort of bringing that different paradigm perspective in. So I'm sure we'll hear lots more from you about what you're doing there. So let me go to our last panelist, Jeremy O'Brien. Are you with us, Jeremy?
Thanks very much, Jim, and a real pleasure to be here. I'm the black sheep of this panel, I think, in that I'm far from an expert on agriculture. but I am a deeply concerned citizen on the topic of agriculture, and I think it's clear that we need another revolution in agriculture. And I'm working on a technology that I think could have a really big impact on that. So I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of PsiQuantum, and that's a Silicon Valley-based quantum computing company. I have been working on quantum computing for about 25 years, and I'm pleased to say that we're now on the cusp of bringing this technology into reality. The reason that I've been working on it for those 25 years is that I believe that it is the most profoundly world-changing technology that humans have uncovered to date. We are working with customers across, the aerospace, automotive, finance, pharmaceutical, and I think for the purpose of this discussion, most notably sustainability industries. When I first read about quantum computing, the promise was that we might bring about a revolution comparable to the digital revolution, the industrial revolution, or the agricultural revolutions that humans had had before. And now I'm very interested in how we might deploy this technology to participate in the agricultural revolution 2.0 that I think we're all talking about here, a sustainable agricultural revolution. And the reason that I'm optimistic about that is because one of the big domains of application of quantum computing is chemistry. So chemistry, of course, underpins everything. Everything ultimately requires a chemical explanation. And it turns out that until we have a quantum computer, we aren't really able to give that detailed explanation. We cannot simulate molecules at any sort of scale of relevance. And so many applications across agriculture of great potential. I'd like to talk, if Jim will allow me, about one in particular that Tom mentioned, which is the carbon footprint of nitrogen fertilizer. That's a very concrete, very well understood one in the context of quantum computing. And there are many others that are speculative, and my sort of call to action to this panel and this audience is let's get on with figuring out how we could deploy this technology, how it could help this revolution that we're in the midst of now. Thanks, Jim.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. Super interesting, and I think we can come back to you to sort of get some more insights into what might be some sort of really radical, out-of-the-box sort of solutions to all of this from the computing side of things. Look, just to kick it off and try to draw together what I've been hearing from all of you, could I put the question to you, to what extent do we see a synergy between achieving climate goals and improving nutrition, and to what extent do we see a trade-off? So in many parts of the world, we know people need to be increasing the amount of nutrition in their diets. We know across the world we probably need to be eating a lot more fresh fruit and vegetables. So, is it a win-win by improving nutrition and trying to reduce the climate impact? Or, in fact, if we want to improve nutrition, do we also have some more pressure on the environment? And what does that mean? So, just initially, what are some of your thoughts about where the trade-offs are or where the win-wins are from linking nutrition to climate? Let me just open it up to see who would like to sort of have a first go at that. And as you're doing this, you might like to sort of link to what you've heard any of your other panelists say.
Shall I give you a start?
Tom,
Tom, you go.
Were you looking almost ready to jump in there?
I'm not sure what I'm hearing here. Are you what? Did somebody ask that I could start? Or?
I was taking a hint from your big smile of whether that was meaning you were perhaps willing to jump in.
Well, as you mentioned, synergies and trade-offs, I love to talk about that. And unfortunately, as a scientist, I often fall into the trap of thinking of the trade-offs more than the synergies. We know that with rising CO2 in the atmosphere, plants have responded to that. They can grow faster. Unfortunately, the carbon does dilute some of the nutrients and make nitrogen less available, make some of the micronutrients also, the micronutrient concentration in foods may be diminishing because of that. So that's a very important trade-off, I think, that's relevant to human nutrition that needs to be addressed. At the same time, I believe that the initiatives that we take to build soil health, for example, may be helpful in ensuring that foods that we produce are more healthy. I think a component of improving soil health is the diversification of crops, growing a more diverse crop rotation that keeps the soil green cover over a greater proportion of the year. And by diversifying those crop rotations in itself, I think we make available foods that cover a wider range of human nutritional needs.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks there. Anitha, I can see you sort of rapidly writing some notes there. Fundamentally, do we have a trade-off or a synergy around the nutrition-climate linkage?
Okay, again, I'm taking example of millet. Okay, so at least from my work experience, I would like to talk about it. In many countries, I worked in both Africa and Asian countries. So in most of the countries of Africa and Asia, what is actually eaten more is maize, wheat, and rice. And you all know that. And so what I actually found eventually is the water footprint, that actually water usage of rice is actually 30% more compared to millet to give the same nutrients in the same quantity, like even iron or zinc. So we have to spend a lot for rice and wheat and maize compared to millet when and for fertilizer usage, again, is very low for millet, and then carbon footprint is also low for millet. So when we can actually afford to the crop that is produced in a less cost, so it's good for the farmers, and also when it can give more nutrients, 30% more than the other big three. So I see really the investment should go on millets. And we have conducted a recent systematic review and meta-analysis that we have conducted recently, and it's also published. So what is evident is millet is multiple, it has actually multiple benefit. So why don't we actually look at the multiple benefit? Like it already I said, carbon footprint is low, water usage is low, and now it is actually, it can actually reduce up to 50%, blood glucose level compared to rice. So it's actually another advantage. It's diabetes, it's a global health issue. And then the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It is actually almost 30% of the world population is affected by non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and it is actually predicted that it's going to be doubled by 2050. And then there is anemia. So all bigger health challenges when I'm seeing, and then the bigger benefit of growing millet, I definitely actually say that there should be a diversification of multiple food group, but there is a need for diversification in the bigger portion that we are consuming. That's what I really wanted to emphasize, so that the nutrients actually will be increased in that bigger portion. Yes.
Right. Thanks, Anitha. I mean, you've given us a nice example of where you would say there is a clear win-win there by using millet. Just very quickly, how do you get people to eat millet as opposed to rice? Because I think if we look at rice consumption in Africa, for example, I think it's going up very rapidly.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I missed your question, the first sentence of your question.
Sorry, apologies if it's my strange Australian accent. How do you get people to eat millet as opposed to rice? And I think if we look at the statistics in Africa, for example, I think rice consumption is going up very rapidly. So, how do you get people to eat something differently? Just very quick response. Might come back to that.
Okay, yes. Actually, yes, rice consumption is increasing. That's true. But the culturally sensitive way of introducing the crop without affecting the taste preferences and it is possible, and we have proven it in several studies that was conducted in school feeding program in India, and also in Africa we have conducted school feeding program where we could able to change that the behavior through the participatory approach. It's possible. It's only it needs the awareness, knowledge, and they should able to accept it. The taste preference, it should meet with everything. Then it is possible.
Okay, so we need to be thinking very carefully about people at the consumption end of the value chain, not only the production end. But we'll come back to that. Oumar, I think you're dying to jump in here and give us some thoughts about the win-wins and the synergies. Sorry, the win-wins and the trade-offs.
No, I really feel like there is a synergy, and that's really give me also the hope. And I feel like people, the more and more we are getting aware of that. For instance, I will just highlight the point on the food waste and food loss. So do you imagine that in certain countries that farmers lost around 0.5% of the harvest due to various reasons? So this is a big loss that could really fill the gap of most of a big part of the importation of food. So you take, for instance, the rice, as my colleague Anitha said. You take, for instance, you imagine the carbon footprint of 1 kilo of rice traveling from India or China up to Bamako or anywhere, and you imagine the footprint that's linked to that. Why don't we have to promote production at the local level, which will be closer to home and less impact on the climate? So I really see that these are some of the synergy that can be win-win. And also, as Anitha said, we should also invest a lot in nutrition education. So you will see that the media, the current influence is the junk food that have been promoted, which is high impact into the climate change and less nutritious. How can we really invest into children education to ensure them that they are prioritizing nutritious foods, and that is also indigenous for them and close to their home? So I think that these are some of the line of investment that we have to prioritize in creating a synergy of win-to-win. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Oumar. I'm just coming back to the question I asked Anitha. I mean, what's your experience in getting people to eat things that are different, that are good for their nutrition and good for the planet? Is it an easy task, or is that a huge challenge that we face?
Definitely. So I used to work for Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa, Accra, and that was my past job. So we have been quite investing in what we call the sweet flesh potato. So that's women and cowpeas that are small and almost local products that are produced locally in the backyard farm or even the closest farm, that are nutritious and can be produced anytime and do not require much water like irrigation for rice or any other maize, but they are really solid in terms of nutrition. And we have been promoting this in Ghana, where also now this have been even transformed and been available for school feeding. And as well as Anitha preferred the millet also in Senegal, where we have been promoting millet at school feed, millet with some kind of milk, which is a favorite food in Senegal, that we are promoting for children at the school, so that they have been able to eat something that is growing in the country and close to the earth and linked to their culture. And so I think these are something that we have to invest more and more and promote for the young generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Oumar. And Lesley, I mean, being a systems thinking person, what's your view on the trade-offs or the synergy?
So just talking to the issue of trade-offs, I just wonder if this is about people and the way people think about the challenges that they face. And I don't think a solution that it has a fundamental trade-off is a solution, full stop. The amount to which we're going to need to transform the way that we produce and consume food, the way that we create value chains, means that we've got the opportunities now to build in those win-wins. If we look at some of the key signals that we're seeing, the World Benchmarking Alliance is benchmarking around 300 of the biggest food companies in the world for their performance around the food system, both from the point of view of their impact on environment, but also on social dimensions as well and economic dimensions. dimensions. And so taking those approaches together, we're able to get a much better picture of the impacts and the ways forward for transformation. If we look at the shifts now in financing in the food system, we've had a massive focus towards ESG, which could be simply a tick box exercise and not actually create change. But actually what we're seeing is the emergence of interest in the financial system towards goals for performance that are far beyond simply financial performance, but also resilience, also carbon, also environmental, and I hope we will see within that just performance as well, so how we are treating people. And that will drive new routes for capital flows towards those win-wins, but only if we build it in. I just wanted to address that question, though, of how do you get people to change? And I think it flags that issue that this really is a people issue. We've got the power, we've got the influence. It's about how we think and how we act. And one of the things that I engage with every day is the shift in protein consumption around that issue of environmental and climate-friendly diets and a shift away from meat consumption, for example. And it really raises that question of how you're going to get people to eat this. And maybe ultra-processed foods aren't necessarily the future solution that we want. One of the projects that we delivered called Future Plates, go and have a look at it on our website, was to work with chefs to understand what they needed, because they all get trained to produce these traditional menus for people. How did their training need to transform? Something as practical as that, to have the skills and capabilities to deliver those menus and to deliver food. And how can that influence, for example, the school lunch system and what is provided to people in that hugely important area of youth nutrition, but also often for some of the most vulnerable within communities. So I think my first point with this would be that you cannot look for trade-offs, you have to look for win-wins. And at this point of extreme transformation and innovation, we have that possibility to design in those win-wins now. And that we need to look at this as a practical and people thing, as well as kind of grand solutions. But we are talking about rewiring the way we do things for those win-wins.
Great, thanks, Lesley. So do you see that you have enough of a menu of win-wins to make the transformation?
So I guess, yeah, I think the solutions are there. So I'll give you one example that always gives me hope, that has stayed with me through my life. About 15 years ago, I was working with Colombian farmers, cattle ranchers, on the edge of the Amazon. So we were working in areas that had been deforested, and those farmers were adopting new ways, working with organizations like CIPAV in Colombia, were adopting new ways of farming that meant that you built in silver pasture. You didn't just plant grass and wait for it to die off in the dry season. You planted grass and shrubs and trees, and they were able to take off of that land, not just in some cases 10 times the level of cattle productivity, but they were also growing a separate crop in terms of agroforestry, and they were setting aside land for rewilding and reproduction, effectively reforesting that land through looking at the way that they dealt with their land differently. But that was actually funded as a climate project, not as a nutrition project. But it created so many co-benefits, and it is just one of those beautiful solutions that works incredibly well across the tropics. So we have those solutions now, but we don't necessarily have the momentum and the coherence and the joined up working to make that happen. So that was one thing I would say, is I really hope at COP27 we're not in just one pavilion here or one pavilion there talking about food and agriculture, but we recognise those interconnections, and the COP really puts food and agriculture front and centre of the way that we look at building out the climate transformation.
Great, thanks, Lesley. Yes, I think we're hearing a lot of stories and examples about where there clearly are the win-wins that can take this whole agenda forward. Jeremy, just coming back to you, I'm not sure if you'd like to add into this discussion, but I was going to kick a next round of questions off with you. But first, is there anything you would like to say on this trade-off and win-win story?
Yeah, thanks very much, Jim. I really find Lesley's perspective very inspirational. If it's a trade-off, it's not a solution. I think that's a good mantra for people. And I think also coming out of the discussion is, we need to be human-centric, and I think Oumar and Anitha were clear on this. It's not about, making people change their diets, but sort of inspiring them to do so with, healthier, more nutritious, more tasty food. And I love this idea of going to chefs. And I have an experience of this from long ago, also around 15 years ago, of working with some Liberian refugees in Ghana who were displaced due to conflict. And I vividly remember being told, we Liberians, we say, if we haven't eaten rice, we haven't eaten. And of course, they were in a circumstance where rice was very expensive and beans were, readily available. And I think that just speaks to this topic, which is that we really want to inspire people, give them something that's great for them, not ask them to, suffer privations in order to help things. So I think that's really a really interesting way of looking at things. And yeah, perhaps I'll leave it there for now, Jim.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to come back to you with sort of a next set of questions, which essentially is how far sort of out of the box of our current understanding of what we eat do we think the solutions lie? So, you've been talking about, quantum computing and rethinking chemistry, which has got all sorts of implications. So I guess we can imagine that, is all of our food going to be produced in some big vat? Are we going to shift to a huge amount of seaweed production, or are we looking down the tube at some really radically different ways of feeding the world in a more nutritious and environmentally sustainable way? Or is the basic structure that we have with sort of tweaks around the edges going to be the way we're going forward? What's the range here between really radical ways of changing the sorts of things we produce and eat, and how much we understand farming as being the core as opposed to factory food production into the future, and what perhaps are some of the implications for that? So Jeremy, I'm not sure if you'd like to kick off with that, and then I'll just open up to whoever would like to jump in.
Sure. Well, just taking up a point that Lesley made previously, we have the solutions, and I think that is true across sustainability and climate change more generally. We have the solutions, and we've had them for decades. What we haven't had is the political, social, and economic will to implement those solutions. And I view, technology more generally and quantum computing specifically as just making it easier to implement solutions. Coming up with solutions that are easier to implement. But I think it's a big mistake to think that we need technology to ride to our rescue. We need to solve, agriculture and sustainability and climate with all the tools that we currently have, and then in parallel with that, we need to be building new tools and deploying them. That's my personal view on this. And I think to the specifics of quantum computing and chemistry, I'd like to just give you one very concrete example of the type of thing that we could imagine doing. Not because it's necessarily the most important problem, although it is an important problem, but because it really speaks to how we might deploy this technology in the context of agriculture. And Tom raised this in his introduction, which is the CO2 footprint of nitrogen-based fertilizer production. So I think probably most people in this room and on this panel are aware that depending on how organic your diet is, up to half of the nitrogen, which is the fourth most abundant element in your body, was made in a factory in a high temperature, high pressure process. And that process consumes several percent of global energy production and several percent of global natural gas production. And so there's a very good economic reason to do better, never mind an environmental and nutritional and so on reason to do better. And at this point, obviously, the disclaimer is we don't necessarily use that nitrogen-based fertilizer wisely, and we cause all sorts of environmental problems with its overuse and indirect use and so on. But nevertheless, it's very energy expensive and natural gas expensive to produce that fertilizer. The process that we used to do that was invented more than 100 years ago. And despite the imperative to do better, we haven't done better, despite knowing for certain that there is a better way to do it, because we know that there are bacteria in the soil doing exactly that task, not at high pressure, not at high temperature, but at ambient conditions. And so those bacteria, over billions of years of evolution, have enabled, sort of chemistry miracles to be performed. And that's true across the natural world. What nature does with chemistry is truly astounding and makes us look like cavemen by comparison, I would say. And a big part of that is our inability to simulate that chemistry. And so we can identify the nitrogenase enzyme in those bacteria that does that job of nitrogen fixation naturally, but we don't have the first hope of figuring out exactly how that works until we have the capability to simulate it. And the only way we can do that is with a quantum computer. So that's one very specific example, but hopefully it speaks to the broader question of chemistry and biochemistry in agriculture.
Yeah. Great. Okay, thanks, Jeremy. That's a really nice example there. So just let me open it up to any of the other panelists. Now, how far out of the box do we think our solutions will be in terms of the way we currently sort of look at agriculture and food systems? Either just or stick your hand up. Well, go for it, Tom.
Yes, Jim, I think I have 2 points to make here, I guess. First, I'll just respond to Jeremy's comment on the nitrogen. And indeed, you know, the carbon footprint of nitrogen manufacture is an issue that we recognize. And but one of the reasons that it gives me hope on this is that a large number of the nitrogen manufacturers have announced investments in the last few years on making what they call green ammonia. Ammonia that's manufactured without emission of any carbon dioxide. The technologies being explored for this is use of electricity, use of hydrogen, a hydrogen economy sort of thing. So this is something that has some potential, and we envision a considerable percentage of nitrogen fertilizer being manufactured by that method in the near future. Indeed, replacing what plants do or replicating what plants do in terms of nitrogen fixation has been sort of the holy grail of a lot of chemistry and biochemistry for a long time, and indeed it would be great to see that happen. But I think the other focus that we've built into responsible plant nutrition as well is this whole idea of recycling. And what that comes down to is wastewater. So we can think of being really radical in changing the way we as humans handle nutrients. But in the end, we humans eat the same or depend on many of the same essential minerals that plants do. It's in our diet. And so wastewater treatment, I think, is a huge area of opportunity for recovering nutrients, getting them back to the land, and doing so safely. But we have to recognize that much of the world has very poor wastewater treatment. I've had, through the Global Partnership on Nutrient Management, in which the industry participates, we've had some joint work on a global wastewater initiative, and I've actually had a tour of Nairobi's wastewater treatment plant. They actually capture something like, I believe it was told, 40% of the sewage generated in Nairobi. That's one of the highest cities in sub-Saharan Africa percentages. So I think there's a lot of investment that needs to be done to make sure that our wastewater treatment is both safe and is recovering rather than wasting the nutrients that are there.
Yeah. I mean, what I'm hearing from you, Tom, is an idea that there's lots and lots of different things we can be doing across the whole value chain, if you like, in all sorts of different ways that collectively add up to the solution. So it's not one big bang.
That's quite correct. It's not one big bang. Yeah.
Shall I try and follow on from this? In the box or out of the box ideas, I think some of the key things that we have in the box are often so boring but so essential to the transformation that we don't look at them. But if we want to think about how we're going to move to value chains that can handle a diversity of different crops, that can handle farming systems that are more complex than monoculture, for example, we need to be able to build in infrastructure that can actually handle those. We need to be able to physically have routes to market to enable them to do that. And we need to have partnerships with off-takers and growers to de-risk that shift for the growers themselves. So some of those solutions are in the box, but it's actually out of the box thinking of how do we do this differently. And I think I see these technological solutions as being a really interesting point of acceleration. I get slightly scared by quantum computing because I have to admit, this ages me, I was 24 before I actually even touched a computer, so I don't know what he's talking about, but I trust you completely with it. But I do think that there are other ways in which we could look at these solutions that is actually an out-of-the-box way of thinking about what we already do, which is ask smaller farmers what they need, involve them in the conversation, understand what is going to enable them to engage in the market. And then I think you're in a position where the out-of-the-box thinking is the creativity and the innovation and the new ways of looking at how people can thrive and engage in that market. And listen to them about what they need to be productive and resilient and thrive and be regenerative moving forward.
Great. Thanks there, Lesley. I'm glad that the panel managed to survive without a moderator. Maybe I can just hang up permanently now, but I'm not quite sure what happened. My internet suddenly died. So any other comments on this topic?
Yeah, I can add. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's you. That's you, Jeremy. Or is that you, Oumar? Jeremy.
No, I wanted just to add. Yeah, I just wanted to add the fact that I think that the COVID situation is really a kind of a stress test and even give us a lot of learning that we really have to use to move our way toward mitigating and coping with the climate change. How can we learn from the COVID situation? Where we were in the world that we faced an unprecedented situation, everything was somehow locked. The transportation, the things, people have to really think twice out of the box to get a solution locally to survive. Yeah. So there are a lot of learning that we have to really take off from the COVID situation and can we really source of long-term innovation and sustainable for us. I think that we really have to build on that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Look, I'm watching the time here. We've got 8 minutes left. We could clearly be talking about this topic for the whole rest of the day, but unfortunately we don't have that time. What I'd like to do is to ask each of you briefly to give some inputs in your thinking about the value chain perspective. So in our discussion already, we've been talking about the production end, we've been talking about consumers, we've been talking about finance, we've been talking about the role of private sectors in having higher criteria for how they do, business is not only profit driven. So maybe if I could just have a quick response from each of you about what you think's needed to get this sort of integrated approach to climate, let me say climate smart and nutrition sensitive value chains. Having had that response from all of you, I'll just give each of you sort of a chance at the very end to give one last key message that you think you'd like the audience to take away. So firstly, this question around value chains, how do we get the whole integrated approach across value chains to deliver what we want? Anybody like to kick that one off?
Should I jump in?
Yeah.
Collaboration, collective action and collaboration across the sector. We need people who would not normally sit in a room together to work out these solutions together. And I hope our work on protein in Southeast Asia and on regenerative agriculture in the US is really trying to bring together and facilitate that collaboration for new solutions. And each of the sessions that I've been in has really emphasized that need for us to collaborate and come together and understand the solutions together.
Just quickly there, Lesley, I mean, there's been an interesting recent report that looks about the amount of subsidies that goes into various parts of the agriculture sector, and there's obviously a lot of power and politics around that. Is getting people just to sit around the table enough?
Well, I think it's about sitting around the table to decide what you're going to do. The kitchen table isn't going to get you anywhere other than Greta's blah, blah, blah. So I think we're all have that call to action to get on with it, but in a coordinated way. But one of the reasons that we have a policy work stream within the work we're doing in the United States is that the policy incentives and financial incentives for the shift in agriculture that's required to meet the climate just don't exist. It's a perverse worse situation financially, and we need people to act together with coherent voices, and certainly those who sit at the top of value chains have got a huge amount of potential for influence in telling policymakers what is required for them to be able to actually make that action happen.
Right, thanks, Lesley. I mean, Oumar, you've been up to your neck in value chains across Africa, I think. So, what's your experience of how to get value chains doing the right thing?
Yeah, there are some noise background. So my thing is just synergy, integration, and yeah, that's are the 2 points.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, in North America, there's oh, sorry. Jim, did you say my name, or is it Anita going?
I said your name, Tom.
Okay, thanks, Jim. I think of an organization in North America named Field to Market. And this is a collaborative movement that's been working at least 10 years. The fertilizer industry has been engaged with that in order to link what we call the 4 R's of nutrient stewardship, applying the right rate, the right time, the right place, to get all the outcomes of responsible plant nutrition. And get them recognized by the rest of the value chain. And in that value chain, we have distributors, we have agri-retailers, we have food retailers as well. And ultimately, it's the consumer needs a label that they can trust that does ensure the outcomes of the thing. And it's a huge labor to do all this collaboration. So I'd just encourage paying attention to organizations like Field to Market, because I think that's the kind of initiative that's needed.
Did you say my name? Oh, I'm not. Okay, yours is muted. Muted. Sorry.
Thank you, Anita. Any thoughts on getting value chains to work properly for our goals?
Yes, yeah. If you look at the staple value chains, we all know that rice, wheat, and maize value chain is completely developed. It's a fully established and developed, and everyone, there is no struggle in that. But anything new that is coming in is always having that problem of, because it needs a lot of collaboration. So it has always problem of here and there may be production, but there may be less consumption, or there may be consumption demand, but the production is less. So that actually we see for the value chains, for the commodities, which is not actually fully established, which needs a lot of collaborative work, policy change. There is definitely need for the government to interfere in this and bringing that kind of policy change. And there is a lot of scientific evidences required to actually even promote the market. And there is a need for working in every bit of the market, from the production, then SMEs, markets, and the consumers. There is a lot of need for working with the consumers, behavioral change. So there is always I have experience in working with millet, PGNP. In fact, in Tanzania, when we introduced PGNP in school meal program, that there was no consumption demand at all. It was a new food for them in the basket. So it required a lot of work with the consumer end. So it all depends, because some value chain is fully established, some are not. Yes, right. And it requires a lot of work from everyone.
Thanks, Anita. Look, we've covered a tremendous amount in just a short hour. Let me just go around everybody, starting with Jeremy, for just a very quick last soundbite of what you would like to have as your takeaway message, perhaps linking it to something you've heard from one of your other panelists.
Well, I think I heard from every one of my co-panelists the need for collaboration, and yes, let's collaborate. And if the fact that it's a major urgent challenge isn't enough for you, collaborate, because there's value that's going to be created. And why is there value going to be created? Because everyone benefits from a better educated, more technologically literate, and healthier global population.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. Lesley.
We've got 10 years. We've got to do it. and we have to step up to the shift and the transformation that is required right now. And yes, collaboration, but we need to look at the wider system that we're in and what opportunities we have to work together. And I'm really hopeful.
Thanks, Lesley. Tom?
I'm speaking to you today from Salt Lake City, where the American Society of Agronomy, the Crops and Soil Science is meeting. And what really gives me hope is that there's a huge number of younger people addressing a lot of these issues in the science work that they're doing. So work that looks at plant nutrition, makes plant nutrition more responsible, more sustainable, and guides the stewardship of the nutrients that we use in agriculture. I think a focus on that is important.
Thank you. Anitha, and finally, Oumar.
Did you say my name?
I said Anitha first, and we'll finish with you, Oumar.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, you said my name. Okay, yeah. Yes, so yeah, so there is a need for collaboration, integration from different field. I mean, there is a need for health and Department of Agriculture, Education, Ministry of Education should be part of it. So it cannot happen without collaboration in all the horizontally, vertically. Yes.
Thank you. And finally, Oumar.
Yeah, I am really hopeful because I know that we don't have a planet B. We have only one planet that we'll have to save it. So definitely, and on the I think that yes, the fact that people are engaging, the more and more people are investing into innovation to really address the problem. So that is really a big source of hope for me. And if you go across the world, you will see that number of young people that are engaged to solve this problem. I think that together we will make it. Again, synergy, working together, and integration, innovation at the grassroots level will make the solution. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Look, we're out of time. Thank you all very much. That was a super stimulating discussion. We've raised a huge range of issues. I think we've left no doubt about how important the linkages are between nutrition, health, and climate issues. That has to be linked if we want to solve the climate problem, but it has to be solved if we want to tackle a whole lot of other human challenges. You've all been very optimistic about saying there really are a lot of win-win opportunities out there, but we just have to get people collaborating to make sure they come into reality. And I think also that we have to get the incentives right, whether it's at the consumption end or the production end, to drive those changes. So again, thank you all very much. I hope our audience has enjoyed listening to this, and hopefully we'll cross paths at some other point. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed.